Okay, so let's hope we can manage a little bit better this week. So I said this is going to be sort of a transition piece, moving somewhat away from the stress on tropes towards what on the first lecture my notes say I called it poetics of death. I don't remember saying that, but if I did say that, let me reiterate it now. But I want to sort of translate it a little bit. Poetics of death centered, also a politics of death, I suppose I should say, or politics of dying perhaps, that's centered on the concept of haunting. I suppose I should say I don't believe in ghosts, so I'm using haunting as a metaphorical concept, or at least understanding it to have a psychological and a cultural reality rather than a material one. There was one of the women friends of Voltaire, Madame du Châtelet perhaps, Madame du Châtelet, perhaps, who said, I don't believe in ghosts, but I certainly am afraid of them. That's kind of the idea that I'm fishing for here. I think I understand haunting as a figure for memories that won't go away, for the obsessive memory, on the one hand, and on the other hand, for knowledge that's not acknowledged, on the other hand, especially knowledge of an injustice that's not being faced, what Charlotte Delvaux calls useless knowledge, connaissance inutile. And so I suppose the single word that stands for both of those things might be death. But its relevance of haunting to witnessing writing, I think, lies in the perception that I have, and some of these texts seem to support, that a text that is haunted in the first sense, in the memory sense, and by an obsessive memory that won't go away, particularly by the memory of death, can also be a haunting text in the second sense. It can be a text about knowledge that is culturally not yet acknowledged. So it can haunt the culture through being itself a haunted text. And the reason I wanted to focus somewhat on Charlotte Delvaux's trilogy today is that it strikes me as being an exemplary illustration of that kind of double truth. The haunted was also haunting. But you might think of our encounter already with the figure of Orm in Regeneration. Remember when Sassoon and Owen have been working on Owen's poem, Anthem for Doomed Youth. Sassoon reads that poem as being a visitation from the edge, and sure enough, the figure of Orm turns up standing by the door, standing there reproachfully, and causing Sassoon to say to himself, Orm did not seem worried, but he, Sassoon, realised that this was something for him to worry, a cause for him to worry. Okay, so now we can all go home. I've done my, basically laid it out there. Let's back up a little bit to make another point. I think, I've never seen this written down, and so I feel a little tentative about saying so, but I think one of the definitional characteristics of witnessing writing is that there tends to be a tension in it, always a tension, between the collective nature of the event, the experience, the atrocity, the injustice that is being borne witness to, and the singularity of the narrative itself, the fact that the narrative is always the story of an individual's experience, an individual's perception, an individual's account of an atrocity, a disaster that was collective. So it's an individual account of a collective calamity, whether trench warfare, whether the extermination camps, AIDS, always collective. And I think that is closely related to the problematics of survivorhood, of being a survivor. Because the survivor is, by definition, unrepresentative with respect to the masses of the dead. The event is always collective, and there are always, so to speak, more dead than there are survivors, or the survivor is always a solitary figure as opposed to the collectivity of the dead. But of course, it's only by virtue of surviving that witnessing is possible. Survival is the condition of there being a witnessing story. Or more accurately, I think something fundamental to witnessing happens before the story gets told. And what's fundamental to witnessing is, that's the thought that goes through people's head, I do not agree with what is going on here. I am withholding my assent to what is happening to me. Because I think there's a moment when witnessing begins. But that moment has to be realized in the form of a story in order for it to have a cultural impact. So there are two kinds of survival that are necessary. The storyteller has to survive the event, and then the story has to survive the event in order for witnessing to occur. So there's a certain degree of guilt then attached to witnessing because of the unrepresentativeness of the witness. And also a sense of double bind, which we've talked about before. I mention it again because Charlotte Delvaux has some great formulations of that sense of double bind. She says, the very fact that we are here to speak denies what we have to say. That's her definition of being a survivor of the extermination of Auschwitz and other extermination camps. And a little bit later, in one of her more poetic moments, she says, you don't believe what we say. She's addressing an audience here. You don't believe what we say because if what we say were true, we wouldn't be here to say it. You don't believe what we say because if what we say is true, we wouldn't be here to say it. In other words, the object of the witnessing is collective. The subject of the witnessing is singular. So that sense of guilt, that sense of double bind is also associated with sense of privilege. And you can see, looking back over the history of witnessing, that witnessing subjects are always in some sense privileged. The World War witnessing of 1418 was done by the officer class, not by the troops, the regular folks. It was the officer class, the educated people, who, in spite of everything, had a better time in the trenches than the, I can't remember the phrase for the troops, the regular soldiers. To be able to witness the extermination camps, you had to have had some kind of luck. You had to be non-Jewish, for example, or if you were Jewish, you had to not have entered the camps until quite late in their history, sometime in 1944 perhaps, or something like that. Or you had to have the fortune to have been employed indoors for at least part of the winter, or whatever it might be. Buna, the artificial rubber factory, seems to have been one of the pépinières of Auschwitz witnessing, because if you were sent to Buna, you weren't indoors. Just about as simple as that. And you had some chance of surviving. In the case of age writing, it's perfectly patent that just about, I would say, 90% of the writing, particularly the first person writing, is done by, am I not speaking loudly enough? Oh, okay.
Buried in the
Oh, well. Now you're making me feel guilty because I said to myself, it really is time I had my hair cut right. Okay. So as I was saying, quite obviously most AIDS, although most people who die of AIDS or suffer from AIDS, have contracted AIDS, are not gay, white, middle class, North American, European or Australian men, or English men, or whatever, French. The fact of the matter is that most of the witnessing is done by that educated class that has the leisure, the education, the literacy, the contacts to write the account and get it published. So there's that sense of prestige. But the point that I think is crucial from the point of view of the focus of this seminar is that a single tale, or the singular tale, is rhetorically also a relatively weak story. As you will know if you've ever attended a meeting where a decision had to be made and you've had the misfortune of being the only person to defend the point of view that you're defending at that meeting, you might as well shut up, right? Because what you have to say is not heard. It's only if there's a resonance of some kind that what you're saying has a certain kind of authority, which is the authority of the redundant, I would want to say, in technical terms, right? So the survivor's tale is guilt-ridden with respect to the collectivity that it's about, but it's also rhetorically weak in relation to its audience, which is the more easily able to dismiss it, the less corroborative and other accounts that there are that correspond. They don't necessarily have to agree, they just have to correspond. At the beginning of Elie Wiesel's, I suppose we can call it a classic witnessing text, Night, La Nuit, there's a character, his name is Moshe. Moshe is a foreign Jew in a Hungarian shtetl, who is deported along with the other foreign Jews, while the native Hungarian Jews, so to speak, allow them to go and comfort themselves that they are themselves not foreign, and they hope that everything will be okay for the foreigners, but basically they're relatively indifferent. The train takes them to the borders of Hungary and Czechoslovakia, where it is met by the SS. The SS take the Jews into the forest and shoot every single one of them, except Moshe, who escapes accidentally. Comes back to the shtetl and tells the story. Nobody believes him. 1942, no one wishes to believe him. And so he says, I have it in French, is that all right? J'ai été sauvé par miracle, he says. So there's the survival thing miraculously saved. J'ai réussi à revenir jusqu'ici. An advantage of using French is that you get that verb revenir, which has the connotations of the revenant, of the ghost. Right? There are other words in French for a ghost, but revenant is the very standard one. So I managed to come back here. D'où ai-je pris cette force? How did I get the strength to do that? Well, j'ai voulu revenir à Sillette pour vous raconter ma mort. I wanted to come back in order to tell the story of my death. So he is, in his own estimation, a dead man walking, a dead man talking. Pour que vous puissiez vous préparer pendant qu'il est encore temps, so that you can prepare while there's still time. Vivre, je ne tiens plus à la vie. Right? To live, I'm no longer particularly anxious to live. Je suis seul. I'm alone. Mais j'ai voulu revenir et vous avertir. I wanted to come back and warn you. Et voilà, personne ne m'écoute. There you have it. No one listens to you. So there's a kind of complex of things there. The returning ghost, the solitude, he's a lonely ghost, and the fact that no one wants to listen. In other words, there's a problem of inaudibility for the survivor when the survivor is a returning ghost. And at the end of La Nuit, the narrator, having been through the nightmare himself, having lost his father and having survived, finally gets to take a look at himself in the mirror, and the last two sentences of the text are, "Du fond du miroir, un cadavre me contemplait." From the other side of the mirror, almost, a cadaver was staring at me. Son regard dans mes yeux ne me quitte plus. His look into my eyes has not left me since. So he's become a ghost too. But the problem with that ghost is the problem of visibility. The inaudibility of Moshe is matched by the invisibility of who needs the mirror as the optical instrument that makes him apparent even to himself. And of course, as you know, from the long tradition of ghost stories, mirrors are the places where spectres most easily become apparent. So, problem of audibility, problem of visibility, attached to the ghost as revenant, the returning ghost. And all that, I think, has to do with the ghost's singularity as a survivor. All right? Comments, thoughts, questions?
This reminds me of the introduction to the Delbo book where she writes the anecdote of hearing the name.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that makes you feel really creepy, right? Yeah. Okay. Now, that was moving back a little bit. Now I'm going to make a lateral move. I told you this would be a bitty little talk. And just mention Jacques Derrida's excursion into what he likes to call not ontology, but ontology. Not ontology, but ontology, even better pun in French. In that book, it's called Spectres of Marx. Derrida makes a kind of counterintuitive, what to me was a counterintuitive comment when I first encountered it, which is the idea that the ghost is always plural. Because, says he doesn't quite say this, but he implies that the ghost can't have a proper name. It can have nicknames, like Moshe Lebedeau, who doesn't have a family name, far enough to nobody knows his family name, or Patient Zero, another example of a ghost with a nickname but not a proper name. And what Derrida means by that is that the ghost is a manifestation of iterativity. I need to write iterativity on the board. All right. Sheer pleasure. Which, being able to write in French, he captures by saying the ghost only ever comes by coming back, by returning. It's better still in French, il vient en revenant. Le spectre vient en revenant. The coming of a ghost is always a returning, a coming back. I feel inclined to say il ne vient qu'en revenant, and make it even stronger. The only way the ghost can come is as a return. So there's never an original coming of the ghost. It's always the repetition of something, the iteration of something. And it's because of that that the ghost is the sign, for this is Derrida that I'm still aping here, that the ghost is the sign of the fact that time is out of joint. There has been a disjunction in time, a discontinuity in time. And I would add a reason why spectral figures are associated with deferral, which, as you know, is another key term in Derrida, which I mentioned because deferral is absolutely key in RSVP. Obviously, deferred messages. How a deferred message can become a broadcast message is roughly the kind of thing that I see being turned into a parable in RSVP. So, if you like, we can say it with another English pun this time. The spectre is always spectral because it's always the site of a split. That is to say, it implies a spectrum, right? In fact, the same word, spectre and spectrum, are etymologically the same word. Derrida says, not the subject of an ontology, but of not subject of an ontology in the sense of a knowledge of being as undivided, but of a hauntology in the sense of always being split, always having a difference that is essential to it, always being a side of otherness. So disjointed, split from itself, but by virtue of that splitness, it can become a spectrum of differences, and thus, because it is a figure for the difference that is entailed by the alleged same, it is the site of a plural, it is the site of an iterativity. So think of Om again in regeneration. Om is Om, it does have a proper name, but Om is the figure for all the soldiers at the front. Those that Sassoon knows and those that he doesn't know, those who are alive and those who are dead. All the ones that Sassoon feels that he's abandoned. Now, next week I want to argue that prosopopoeia is the figure of the spectral. It's the trope whereby the dead are made to talk, to speak to the living. And that it's because it's the trope of the spectral that prosopopoeia is the figure of deferral and iterativity. And finally, that the rhetorical strength of prosopopoeia derives from the emphasis and the amplification that become available when a spectre is not singular but collective, but traversed by difference. In other words, it's not just that the ghost, that the revenant vient en revenant, but that something also returns in the revenant. And what returns in it gives it the strength of the plural. And as a corollary to that, I just add parenthetically that witnessing voices in the end are not singular ever, to the extent that they resonate with other witnessing voices. Which is why you have to teach a course rather than just reading one witnessing text, shall we say. Or if you like, that's really the basic assumption of this course. And the reason why I feel able not only to traverse several different examples of age witnessing, but also to mix in other forms of witnessing like Holocaust witnessing, war witnessing, and so on. I'm suggesting that all of those forms of witnessing, by virtue of their difference, form a community of witnessing voices. Not by virtue of their similarity, although sometimes they're similar as well. In fact, you can't be different without being similar at the same time. Okay, that's the end of the deconstructionist doctrine for today. Yes, Jackie.
It's something that could be treated as a loss of individual being, because it reminds me of the numbering, the tattooing of numbers and making a collective thing out of people.
Mm-hmm.
If Ida says this person is only part of a collective, couldn't that be interpreted as a Nazification of personality?
I think Primo Levi would read it that way. Primo Levi's reading of immersion, is exactly that. The people who don't survive in Auschwitz, for him, are the people who become part of the grey mass, and the people who do survive are the people who stand out for by virtue of their willingness to play fast and loose with regular morality and things like that. Right? So yes, you can read it two ways, I think. But
Well, even in our making a collective,
but
we believe that
but the discursive fact is that a singular voice. Supposing I came in here and spoke to you in my personal private language, right, which would be my singular voice, right, as opposed to the English language, which is fairly widespread. That would be nice, but probably the university wouldn't support that as a project very long, and after a week or two you'd stop coming. You see, that's the dilemma. You can't talk except by allowing other voices to talk through you. And I don't think that's necessarily fascistic. No. Okay?
Ariel Dorfman has a wonderful little mystery story about Auschwitz, to the effect that one of the prisoners murdered another of the prisoners 3 days before they and a few thousand other people were going to be gassed anyway. And this threw the Nazis into tremendous confusion.
Yeah.
They could see no point in the murder, but they could see some point in trying to track down the murderer. So they spent 3 days trying to track him down with the help of their crew Borrow, and of course had no success at all. But what Dorfman seems to be suggesting is that this absolutely pointless murder of someone who's dying in 3 days anyway, setting in motion this absolutely pointless investigation of a criminal who's going to die in 3 days anyway, was a splendid singularization against the collectivity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's another example of that too. I realize I'm speaking against my own doctrine here for the time being. I think it's in Tadeusz Borowicz's it's short stories, His Way to the Gas, ladies and gentlemen, where apparently on one occasion in the gas chambers, a 14-year-old girl survived the gassing. And the SS had no idea what to do with her. They couldn't figure out what the appropriate thing was to do. She couldn't be allowed to survive on the one hand, but on the other hand she had survived, and didn't that make her different in some sense? I think these are exact illustrations of the tension that I'm trying to get at, which is this tension between the fact that survival does entail singularity and therefore is a good thing, right? While at the same time it induces guilt because death is on the side of the collectivity, which is why the survivor's voice has to have death in it or it doesn't work. Or it's not doing what the survivor's voice morally and ethically needs to do, which is not speak for the survivor alone, but speak with the voice of the dead. Now we have a few things to have nightmares over, right? You know, in other words, it's just a little knot of insoluble tensions.
Are you familiar with Lightman's
No.
Fragments of Fragments?
No.
It reminds me a lot of genre stuff, and I'm curious about the genre.
The fragment,
Yeah.
not fragment, yeah. I'll do what all comparatists do and cite you back another book immediately. Benjamin Komilski. This is taking us a bit from the topics of its quote, but I do recommend if you're looking for some harrowing reading to keep you awake at night. The English title is Fragments, and then there's a subtitle which is something like Memories of a Wartime Childhood or something like that. I originally wrote it in German, and the German title is Bruchstücke. It's in French too, where the subtitle is, where the title is Fragment, une enfance. Where are you looking?
And his last name, O-W.
W-I-L-K, for Komilski, yeah, poet's name. He was aged about 3.5 when he entered Auschwitz, and consequently no more than 5 when he exited it at the end of the war, and ended up in a Swiss orphanage, where he was absolutely terrified, because all the rules that he knew for living didn't apply. And so he found real life, you know, so to speak, you know, regular civilized life in a Swiss orphanage, more harrowing than being in Auschwitz, where he learned the rules. They were pretty horrible rules, but they were the rules, as far as he as a young child was. So the book is in fragments. It's a beautifully written book, but it's fragments, and it's about that phenomenon of memory, of course, which is that the obsessive memory implies the failure of memory at the same time, which, as you say, Charlotte, I'll look up the one you mentioned too, something else harrowing to read. Yes,
Let's go back to addressing the idea of ontology as being a concept. I think one of the section, The Death of Your Name, is probably an excellent example where it is Sylvia who is coming back, and also the idea of them picking out among all of the other skeletons. But it works with that throughout that entire section of that you cannot approach the current death scene without the return, without bringing them back.
Yes, great. Yeah, that's exactly my point. Yeah, great.
And even the fact that when Julian actually dies, she comments that she can see her formidability and beauty returning to pre-camp. So it's almost as though it's also a returning. I mean, only through death does she actually return to something to a date prior to Auschwitz. There's no way of removal from that except for death. It is a suspended sentence, literally, because the death sentence became suspended from the moment of entry in Auschwitz-Birkenau, only through her dying.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Derrida means too when he talks about the time being out of joint. The first 100 pages or so of the Spectres of Marx, you have the patience to read your way through them, are about Shakespeare. He says, I can't read Marx without Shakespeare return. Marx, the famous first sentence of Communist Manifesto, which I was quoting to, was it you, Pat, earlier today? A spectre walks in Europe. For Derrida, has Shakespeare returning, Shakespeare of Hamlet returning. So he starts talking about Marx by talking about the first, those opening scenes of Hamlet. It's another exemplification. Okay, I think we can go fairly fast from the kind of comments that you've been making. I would like to look at the text that I handed out in French, which you will have read in English, called Auschwitz, which is from the first volume. Now, should we work with it in French or should we work with it in English? We work in French, which you don't say. But I don't want to do a close reading. It would take too long, and it's not necessary. Everybody here does close readings in their sleep, right? You can do your own close reading, right? I'm not Derrida, but I can afford to bore you for more than 2 hours at a time, and get away with it. Fortunately for all concerned. But I think it's an interesting text, partly because of the fact that it looks back. She has the habit of particularly in this first book, of telling of an episode and then letting reverberative comments and resonances and thoughts of it seep through for the next several pages. And Auschwitz is part of the seeping through from the previous text that's called Soir, Evening, which is about her friends Berthe and Anne-Marie and their death in the marshes on a working day, and how 4 of the comrades, the compagnes, are detailed to carry the bodies home, and of the ordeal of carrying those unwieldy, heavy bodies over several kilometres after having done a long day's work in the marshes, the worst possible condition, with nothing in your stomach, etc., etc. The slackening of discipline that happens among the guards because of the straggling that's going on, so that Delvaux is encouraged to make a request. She says, why can't we ask one of the people in these trucks to carry the bodies? And the laughter that induces, followed by their own, what's the word that I want, their own response to that, which is to decide that they are going to march through the gates of Auschwitz carrying their bodies with their head high, right, by virtue of the motto that they are using to survive, which is head high or feet first, right? They're not going to go feet first, they're going to head high, and so their head high stands for, partly also, for the two companions who just died, who are, of course, advancing feet first. And then finally the roll call, in which they stand weeping, unable to look at the bodies. So that last moment in the roll call is already in anticipation of the problematic moments of being a survivor, weeping, but unable to do anything about the bodies that have accumulated, right? Which means that this poem is both looking backwards to that thematics of carrying the dead, which is fundamentally, of course, to Charlotte Delvaux's understanding of survivalhood. What you do as a survivor is you carry the dead. While looking forward to the problematics of survival in terms of its relation to those who have died, which makes it an interesting poem. So in its anticipatory function, the poem is about a poetics of haunting. It's about the way the group of Auschwitz prisoners being escorted through the town of Auschwitz, right, functions as a haunt within the city, such that not just the haunters seem eerie, but the city itself loses its reality. Cette ville où nous passions était une ville étrange. Les femmes portaient des chapeaux. And this is the normality. This is the strangeness of. This is how the experience of Auschwitz makes the experience of normal, uncanny, strange, phantasm, unreal. And that unreality is emphasized by her way of understanding the turning away of the passers-by in the street as an indication that they are faceless figures. Aucun des habitants de cette ville n'avait de visage, et pour n'en pas faire l'aveu, tous se détournaient à notre passage. Même un enfant qui tenait à la main une boîte à lait aussi haute que ses jambes, en email violet, qui s'enfuit en nous voyant. Nous regardions ces êtres sans visage, et c'était nous qui nous détonnions. So this is a haunting relationship. See, this is very Derridean avant la lettre. It's a haunting relationship in which there is no ontology in the strict sense anywhere. The town does not have the reality of being, neither do the haunters, the ghosts who are passing through it, have the reality of being. The haunters are the site of astonishment. They don't belong in the reality of the town, but the town itself is unreal. Which looks forward to the account in Volume 3 in particular of post-war France as a haunted society in which the same relationship applies, in which it's impossible to believe in the reality of everyday life. Impossible for the survivors of Auschwitz to believe in the reality of everyday which everybody else is going through. You can't take that seriously. Those people are living without being alive, quite clearly. Now we who are aware of that are similarly not alive, because what we are most aware of is the reality of the deaths that are behind us, of those dead people that we are still carrying with us in our memories. And that spectral side of the group is then picked up in the second part of the poem when they look at their reflection in the store windows. Il n'y avait pas non plus de boutique, seulement des vitrines où j'aurais bien voulu me reconnaître dans les rangs qui glissaient sur les vitres. And the anecdote of the poem is how each woman in the group, of how the je, this is the first time you get je incidentally in the poem, and indeed je is a very rare pronoun in Delvau's writing. It's always nous, right? We, us, we. But the je thinks, gee, I'd really like to see what I look like. Hold up a hand to distinguish herself from those other female prisoners in their camp guard, each of them with their gaunt faces, absolutely indistinguishable from each other. Alas, they all have the same idea. So they all put up their hands, which means that none of them get to see themselves. What you get to see is the group, is the collectivity. A collectivity here pushed to the point of homogeneity. It picks up a little bit of your worry Jackie. This is close to Primo Levi's idea of emotion. Here, where the differences are, there still are differences, and the differences in the je, nous, right? But the group itself becomes a kind of grey mass. And of course that reflects on all the thinking in Delvau's writing about the survival value of sticking with the group. I'll just read you the main passage, but you can think of lots of them, obviously. This is towards the end, when she notices that the SS are making their preparations for departure from the camp. However, both parties, that's the SS on the one hand, the prisoners on the other, agreed on one point: it was important not to be separated from one's group. We had to leave together or remain together. Each one of us had experienced fully the fact that an isolated individual is defenseless, that you can't survive without the others. By the others, we meant those members of our group who hold you up or carry you, qui vous soutiennent ou vous portent, when you can no longer walk, those who help you hold fast when you're at the end of your rope. My group had arrived at a decision, you should not leave. That's the principle of survival in the camp, is to be a group, not to separate yourself from the group. It's too dangerous if you do that. And the way this thing works is that principle of survival in the camps is going to turn out to be the survivors' defense against, the only defense against the next threat that they face, which is their inability to communicate with this unreal world to which they return from the camps. The poem itself doesn't take us that far ahead, though. The haunting relation between two unrealities, really, the unreality of normal life and the unreality of haunters. The poem takes us back to the reality of the prison, of the camp, when they finally read the time. Il y avait l'heure au cadran de la gare. Nous avons été heureuses de la regarder. L'heure était vraie et allégée d'arriver au silo de l'état, and relieved to reach their work site, because that's something that they can cling to, right? There's no further, none of this wishy-washy floating sensation between the two worlds. Où nous allions travailler de l'autre côté de la ville, last line, que nous avions traversé comme un malaise du matin. Beautiful. Translated like morning sickness, like an attack of morning sickness, like a wave of morning sickness. I read that not as implying necessarily pregnancy and the hope of a future and a birth and all of those kinds of things that you might want to read into it, but as implying a double nausea, so to speak. That is to say, the repressed nausea of the citizens of Auschwitz, of Auschwitz, the city, the Polish city, who look away to conceal their own facelessness, as the poem says, but also the nausea that is that the group of prisoners embody with respect to the city, but also which they feel as a result of the ontological unreality of their experience. The malaise du matin is their malaise as much as it is the malaise of the citizens. And it's that double nausea, if you like, that's taken up in the final volume, to which I think I will return fairly briefly after the break. Only in the immediate context of the poem, where, of course, it's crack of dawn when this is happening, so to speak. They're on the way to work, which means that dawn has broken into camp. They've marched as far into town. It might be 7 a.m. or something or other, and by the time they reach the clock and arrive at the beach silos, it might be 7:30 or so. That would make it. I don't have a stronger sense of how to.
Morning based, I think this becomes also limited usually at the beginning of pregnancy.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. I don't know either. Yeah.
And also the particular tension between the inhabitants and the prisoners is what causes this nausea. And of course that is very temporary.
Just the time passing in the city.
Going back to Linda's point that it's the first trimester, it's the time when the pregnancy is not visible as well. It is not a public known thing. It's going back to your whole point about
yeah.
this business about invisibility.
Yeah.
It is a pregnancy, it is there, but no one talks about it because it's not known only through the illness and it's known bodily, which goes back to this articulation.
Perhaps I could...
It's probably what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lovely image. And it's striking, however, because it is singular, I think, in the text. I don't know offhand if there's anything that we can what we all do professionally is look for another image of the morning or the word malaise or whatever. And I don't think I've found it anywhere. So we're dealing with this problem of the singular, the inaudibility of the singular. We don't quite know what to do.
Well, two things. I mean, it could tie in both as a sign of an early stage of pregnancy, but I mean, a sign of, a birth is the birth of a new life, of coming to being an ontological being.
Right.
But of course, I mean, it also has this suggestion that it's sort of a foreshadowing of the haunting.
Yeah.
This is a haunting.
It makes sense, yeah.
To come. But also, I mean, it just occurred to me just what you were just saying about other relations with mourning. Of course, I don't know if there can be any connection, but I mean, it's emphasized throughout the book that this tension between morning and night, because I mean, their mornings are actually nights, and it is referred to a number of times.
That's right. Morning starts at 3 a.m. Yes.
The character who has to get up.
Good point.
In the middle of the night, because that has become her morning.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's sort of this ambivalence between morning and night. Morning sickness also has that sort of that haunting of night of night sickness, and also of the type of music. It's might be stretching it a bit, but I do see this tension between morning and night throughout that entire text.
Yeah, I stretch things so much I can't very well prevent anybody else from doing so. And while we're in business, we might refer back to that other text, which is called Soir. It just occurs to me. There's a sense of the relationship between those two texts right there. I hadn't seen it until Linda asked the question, and Ian gave me time to think. Okay. Ready for a break? Let's take a break. Okay. I have kind of a screen here now about the third volume and the way it, the experience of return to France from the camps reproduces that floating sensation between the two unrealities, so to speak, with the problem of communication on the one hand. How do you talk to people about the camps when words like fear, hunger, thirst mean something totally different in ordinary life than they do in the camps? When people always ask you the wrong questions and don't listen to the answers because the answers have to be longer than anyone can bear listening to. When you're in the business of trying to explain something that's inexplicable anyway, how do you do that? So there's the problem of communication on the one hand, and then the problem of memory on the other hand, which is the link back to the camps. The memory that you can't escape. Why am I the only one left with the ability to remember, says Charlotte. But also the unreliability of memory, the fact that you forget about the tomatoes that you had to eat one summer thanks to the luck of working in Puna, but you remember the horrible, you can't forget the horrors. So as I say, I had a long screed about that, but I think we can take that for read now, because you people are clearly way ahead of me in your thinking here, and in that case there's no point in my going into detail. I just wanted to point out again that third volume does exemplify the response of someone like Charlotte and Wolf to that situation, which is that the survivors group together, that they stay in touch, that they share each other's lives as best that they're able, and in particular, the book exemplifies a plural discourse. Right? It's the discourse of the group formed by, the phantasmic group formed by the survivors, because each of them tells his or her story, or has his or her story told. So the mutual support system that got them through the camps also gets them through the next ordeal, which is the ordeal of surviving the camps. and in the third instance provides a model for doing the witnessing in a way that has a certain amount of rhetorical strength, as opposed to just falling flat in the way that each individual person experiences when they try to tell the story. So I'll skip over that and just sum up that by saying once again, here we have, as in regeneration, two ordeals, not one, right? Two traumas, not one. There is the ordeal of the camps, which poses its problematics of survival, and then the ordeal of having survived the camps and returning, which poses the problem of the inability to bear witness as a problem of survivorhood rather than of survival. Let's say the first question is how to survive, the next question is having survived, what do you deal with this? What do you make of having survived? So the problem of surviving becomes the problem of having survived, of living on. And in each case, collectivity, mutual support, carrying each other and carrying the dead is the only possible response. And in the second case, that response of collectivity also serves another purpose, which is the survival of the story itself, the possibility of the stories being taken up and being heard, being received, thanks to those multiple voices. But the story obviously survives as a ghost also because it's the product of deferment. It's the product of a double or triple deferment with respect to something that you might want to call the actual reality of the camps. Right? It's a deferment in the sense that it is a representation, or the volumes 1 and 2, representations of the kind of pretty harrowing ones, incidentally, but representations. They're out of phase by virtue of their status as representation with the, quote, actual reality, which we don't have any grasp on. But then deferred again with respect to the audience. It's deferred in one instance with respect to the object, and then in the next instance with respect to the audience, because it's the struggle to explain the inexplicable, right? It's inexplicable to whom? To the audience. Who is requiring the explanation? The audience, right? So there's a second out of phaseness there. And then I think the third survival would be that the story is destined to outlast the storytellers. And that's why, among other reasons, the reason we have that very poignant text about the death of Genevieve towards the end. This has to do with, in large part, with what I call the folk theory of witnessing, that it depends on the integrity of the teller, and part of the integrity is that the teller has to be still alive in order to back the story up. There's a lot of anxiety currently because the witnesses, the eyewitnesses of the Holocaust, are a generation that has almost disappeared, is about to disappear completely, and the question that's raised by that is, will the story survive? Will the story outlast? What measures can be taken to survive? So deferment is a weakening of a narrative, which the collectivity of the voices attempts to counteract through a form of rhetorical strength, I think. And that's what the spectrality of the story is all about. All right? Comments? Thoughts? Back?
Phrase on page 258, that the fellow was both subject and object connected with
I think so, yeah. Yes. I don't remember Each one of us recounted her life thousands of times, resurrecting her childhood, the time of freedom and happiness, just to make sure all this had existed and to tell her was both subject and object. Yeah, that does suggest an attempt to hold together some things that are coming apart. Right? Is that the way you read it?
Well, it's sort of summary of the problem,
Yeah.
which is that none of our witnesses are witnesses in the, if you happen to witness the crime sense of the word, because they're always the people to whom this has also happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they have to...
Oh, I see, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting, yeah. No, I wasn't thinking of it in that way. I was thinking of it rather, by virtue of that, the very first quotation that I made. How does it go again? The very fact that we're here to speak denies what we have to say. We are here to speak as subject. What we have to say is that we are with the objects as well. And that split is the only way that you can paper over that split is through an effective narrative. Seems to be what that passage is saying. But I would think that the paradox of spectrality is that the tension is unresolvable, that it doesn't resolve at all. That what makes the effectiveness of a narrative is simultaneously what takes it further away from its object in the sense of its referential object. That's kind of the pathos of the situation that I see.
One of the many flaws in that short picture Titanic is that the framing included a witness who was both subject and object or typically. But they got no mileage out of the tension between those two roles, where the story as they set it up so obviously permitted them to.
Well, that settles it. I have to see that damn film. Thank you. Thank you, Pat.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
The idea of collectivity, what do you think that has to do with the whole partisan communist cell thing?
Absolutely.
One thing. And
Absolutely.
the other one is, when you talk about folk theory of the integrity of the teller, can you tell us more about that?
Oh, yeah, it's simply that, most people want to know of a witness, were you an eyewitness? And is your account a direct and online, sincere account? Right? That's kind of the definition of a good witnessing account.
So it's just sort of the general person in the street saying, were you really there?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. That's even better summary. I wanted to save some time, and I'm going to change the subject a little bit here. This is probably the first time in my life I've handed out a handout that was a musical score rather than playing you the music. Yes, if there's anybody here who can sight read music and sing in tune at the same time, I'll call on you to sing the various parts because I can't do it. I can sight read but I can't sing. You don't want to do it. I thought it's more interesting to look at the score than to hear the music, and I guess I'll try to explain to you why that's the case. It's because the score makes things visible that you may or may not be able to hear in the music. But I wanted to talk about Farewell Symphony and try and persuade you in the course of the next 20 minutes or so that there is a connection between what we've been saying and what we're about to say. But the reason I want to talk about the Farewell Symphony is that it crops up in age witnessing. I've never encountered it in, I'm not a specialist in Holocaust writing, but I don't think I've ever encountered it in Holocaust writing. But here is I forgot to bring the English, so I'll read it to you in French and translate a bit as we go. His friend Marie, well, he's not friend, he's whatever she is, Marie, the figure of Marie, has just left the United States. He feels dumped, abandoned, betrayed by Marie. And his other friend, Musil, is dying. So it's kind of a double disappearance happening in his life. Musil is Michel Foucault when translated into real life, And Marine is Isabella Gianni, when translated real life. Musil tells him a story. Because Musil wants Hervé to write, to re-establish contact with Marine. And so he gives him the story to write in a letter to Marine. Il m'avait raconté, peut-être en l'embellissant, l'histoire de la symphonie dite des adieux de Haydn. So he told me, perhaps with embellishments, the story of the farewell symphony. Embauché compositeur à la cour du prince Esterhazy, un esthète tyrannique, Haydn avait écrit sa dernière symphonie en forme de manifeste. Haydn wrote his last symphony, it says here. There's some very telling errors. Because it's not his last symphony, it's the middle period, symphony number 45. As a manifesto. Y faisant participer les musiciens qui se plaignaient de ce que les caprices du prince Esterhazy les retenaient tard dans la saison, dans ce palais attaqué par les frimas, les empêchant de rejoindre en ville leurs familles. So Haydn is representing the other musicians who are angry at being kept late into the fall because the prince won't go back to town. La symphonie démarrait avec pompe, réunissant tous les instruments de l'orchestre qui se vidait petit à petit et à vue de ses effectifs. So the symphony started off pompously with all the instruments playing together, and then gradually and visibly they stopped playing. Haydn ayant écrit la partition pour l'extinction successive des instruments, having written the score for the successive extinction of the instruments. Jusqu'au dernier solo, until the final solo. It's not a solo, incidentally, if you look at the score. Incluant même dans la musique, including in the music, he says, this is amazing, dans la musique, le souffle des musiciens qui éteignaient la chandelle de leur pupitre. So including in the score, it's the implication, the sound of the musicians blowing their candles out as they left, et leur bruit de pas pour s'échapper en catimini, quand ils faisaient grincer le parquet lustré de la salle de concert. And so also included in the score, according to this mythic reading of the farewell symphony, is the squeaking of the parquetry floor as the musicians tiptoe away, carrying their double bass. C'était indéniablement une belle idée, concomitante à la fois du crépuscule de Musil et de l'évanouissement de Marine. It was certainly a beautiful idea, concomitant with Musil's twilight and Marine's disappearance. Et suggéré par Musil, ce fut l'histoire que j'ai racontée à Marine dans ma lettre, qui ne reçut jamais de réponse. And so I wrote my story to Marine, who never answered. That's l'idée. Edmund White, I didn't bring my copy, has a much simpler, shorter anyway, version in the final chapter, page 405, if you want to check it out. The Alami is page 96, 97. I was silently horrified that things had gone as far as that, and that in the few weeks since I'd stopped phoning, Joshua had become blissed out and demented, bedridden and diapered, and that his preference for freezers was now being referred to in the past tense. I kept thinking of Haydn's Farewell Symphony. In the last movement, okay, there's a piece of accuracy. In the last movement, more and more of the musicians get up to leave the stage. More and more, or less and less, depending on how you look at it. Blowing out their candles as they go. Both of the authors are interested in blowing out the candles. So it's the heart of the illustration. In the end, just one violinist is playing, and both of them think that there's only one violin playing at the end. If you look at the score, I don't know if there are any fiddle players among us. You can confirm that it would be impossible to play the final vase as a soloist. You need two fiddle players. So they're interested in the symphony as a metaphor for the effects of the epidemic, obviously. Right? The serial disappearance, the seriatim disappearances, somewhat, if you've seen the movie Long-Time Companion, that's very much a farewell symphony kind of movie, in that it is structured by those seriatic disappearances of people. So a metaphor for the effects of it, and again a model for a narrative in which a group is gradually decimated one by one. A smallish group in the case of Hubert, what he calls the Club of Five, and a very large group in the case of Edmund White, whose novel lists and relates every sexual encounter that Edmund White had in the course of a very active life. And so you get those references to the blowing out of candles, and the rather telling imaginative detail of the squeaking of the carpentry floor in the case of Hubert, in terms of the symbolics of multiple dyings, multiple deaths. But the anecdote also, without quite saying so in these two cases, concerns the symphony as a semiotic event. The careful construction by Haydn of the symphonic performance, of which the score is what we have left, as a message, and the successful reception of that message. Right? It was written as a message, and it was received as a message. Now, I can't tell you what the reality, the historical reality is, but I can give you a fairly neutral account, which actually is in the front of the score here. That makes it neutral in its own right, because it's about by music historians. You know. The castle was relatively small, and it was in the country. There were 16 musicians. It was a large orchestra for a court orchestra. They were married with children, and the children were running around and getting in the way and all of that stuff. So Esterhazy decreed that the wives and children had to leave, and they went to the nearest town, Eisenstadt. Now the musicians were like servants, you know. In the 18th century, if you were a court musician, you did the gardening when you went rehearsing. You know. In fact, I don't think they rehearsed very much when you weren't performing. You did the gardening or whatever it was. So they couldn't get away to Eisenstadt to exercise their conjugal rights, so to speak, or at least not very frequently. So it was they were subject to an actual injustice, or what they experienced as an injustice. So the symphony was a coded request to the prince to allow the household to go back to town, where the musicians could continue to go have it with their wives and their beloved children. And the prince understood it that way. When the final movement was played, the last candles were extinguished, and Haydn followed the musicians in silence. He's going out too, wondering whether this is his last performance. Prince Nikolaus, however, stopped him, saying, "I have realized your intention. The musicians are longing for home. Well, tomorrow we pack up." How's that for a brilliant piece of industrial action, right? Wouldn't work these days, I don't think. But, you know, the employers were considerably more wimpy in the 18th century than they are now. In German, he said, ich habe Ihr Absicht wohl durchschaut, see through, something like that. Die Musiker sehnen sich nach Hause, this is very German. Nun gut, okay, let's say, I get the message, right? Nun gut, morgen packen wir aus. Packen wir ein. So it's a semiotic event that's happening here, and I want to look at the way that the symphony acts as a model for an act of collective witnessing. Here's the connection with what we were saying before. The sense in which it subsists today as a model for a collective witnessing act. Age witnessing, not like Charlotte Delvau's Holocaust witnessing. How do you do age witnessing as a collective act? Framing a series of departures, disappearances, deaths, so that they don't just function as departures, disappearances, deaths, but as a meaningful, socially transformative message that gets through to someone. So not just disappearance, but a collective disappearing act, if you like, okay, in a strong sense of the word. one that is readable, that can be durchschaut, if you like, right, can be seen through, and is productive of a response, not necessarily of the non-root kind, but some kind of response. A way of drawing attention to an injustice and asking that something be done about it. Now, I did out a whole, I'm going to skip this too, analysis of the way the final movement, it's only the final movement that's basically the issue here, is rhetorically constructed as an exercise in base indeed, which is one of the classical tropes, and it means discontinuity. Usually translated interruption, but I want to do a little bit of work with the idea of asyndeton by suggesting that there are two forms of asyndeton. One is indeed an interruption in which a discourse suddenly stops the line that it's following and another message starts to emerge in it, right? A second message returns in the discourse and takes over from the first one. But I think we can classify forms of suspension as asyndeton too, and in the suspension what happens is that the speaker of the message may disappear, but the message continues in the way. This is a symphony. It's a group of people playing together. And so as the musicians disappear individually, or by pairs sometimes, so the music continues. And indeed, it's important to me that two players are left at the end rather than one, because the presence of two players suggests suspension, even though the logic of the music is quite conclusive. It has the standard classical insistence on the tonic, on the triad tonic chord. Two players sitting there fiddling away after the disappearance of 14 of them suggests that beyond the end of the music another disappearance could occur. That's why I used the phrase suspension. If there was time, which there isn't, of course, I'd show you the ways in which Haydn, is a really clever man, has organised his 16 musicians in such a way as to maximise the number of disappearances that he can write into the music. He splits his violins into 4 parts. That's twice as many as in the standard orchestral score, so that he can have 2 choirs of violins, and one choir can remain after the other choir has left. And he stresses that at the end by, this is on the last page, by having, at the top of the page in measure 81, 2, 3, 4, 5, starting at 86, there's nobody left except the 6 fiddle players. 6 violinists and 1 violist, 7 players. And for the following measures, I'm sorry, I tell a lie here. It's in the previous bars, on the last page but 1, starting at 68, measure 68, that he has the last 2 lines of that page, that he has 3 and 4 and 1 playing with the viola and the cello. The cello leaves at the end of the page, leaving 1, 3 and 4, and the viola. And then at the turn of the page, it's reduced to 3 and 4. Violins 3 and 4 playing with the viola, right? So that then, when violins 3 and 4, which is presumably 3 or 4 musicians, hard to know exactly how he divided it up, when they leave, as the bar line tells you, the double bar line tells you, time for them to go. You don't see any transcription of blowing out candles or stuff like that, I point out to you. What's left is then first and second violins with the viola, down to measure 90 something or other, and then when the viola leaves, we're left with the first and second violin. And then on the wind side, he has 2 oboes and 4 horns and a bassoon. And again, he divides that group into 2 so that they can depart separately, so to speak, even though, you know, in normal conventional ways, the reason you need 4 horns is that the natural horn could only play a very limited number of instruments, so to get harmonies and to deal with modulation, you need at least 4 horns to handle it. So normally horns play together, and normally your oboes play in thirds and sixths with each other, and this kind of he splits them up so that he can get 2 departures out of the horns and oboes. And then his bass instruments, the bassoon, the cello, and the contrabass, play together very normally, share the same line through the greater part of the movement until just before the departure of the contrabass, when all of a sudden he splits it off from its 2 companions. Let me see, this is at the bottom of page 42 of the score. At the very bottom, you see it says violoncello and contrabass, and you can see that the contrabass has a quite different and very athletic part to play there, and through to the top of the next page, where suddenly the contrabass's part is very exposed, right? All the attention of the audience is going to be on the contrabass, right? Gets to the end of its piece there at about 67, measure 67, double bar. So clearly the contrabass's departure is meant to be sort of understood as, God, you've given me this hard work to do, and you know, I've had it, I'm off, right? You know, that's enough. So the whole thing is very cleverly written. But I forgot to mention the structure of the movement itself is very interesting too. It starts off being a typical perky presto with an F sharp minor. Sharp minor is a relatively rare key too, incidentally. I just gave you the first page there where it says finale, presto, etc. I won't even try and sing the tune, but it's etc., 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 right? And it develops normally, until you get to the next page that I gave you, page 37, and suddenly you've gone through the development and you've arrived at the stress on the dominant that always see the last few measures at the top of page 37. It's an F sharp major, but you're on C sharp. Dum da 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 dum pum 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 pum. Fermata, right? Pause. Now, every well-trained classicist knows what's going to happen now is that you will go back to the original tune. That's what you expect, right? What you get is a complete change. It becomes a adagio. It becomes, see, this is AC Eaton has interruption, right? It becomes adagio. The key changes. It's now in the relative key of A major. The tempo changes, 3/8, which is the tempo of the previous adagio, incidentally, and the whole mood changes. Da 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 da. Oh, sorry. Da 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 dee da da. Da 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 dum da 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 dee da da. Like the change of key is particularly significant because it suggests that when you're playing in F sharp minor, there's another key that's kind of present but sort of repressed, and here it's emerged, right? So there's that version of AC Eaton, and that's when the departure of the instrument begins to happen. I've given you the whole of the adagio section there, and you can study it in great detail if you want to do. But the points that I wanted to make about it as a semiotic performance are, one, the message isn't just a statement of desire, as the stories that are told about the symphony seem to suggest. It's not just saying we the musicians kindly request permission to be allowed to leave and go back to Budapest. it's a coded threat. It's saying, we, the musicians of the orchestra, will withdraw our labour, right, unless you print misbehaviour. Give us a break, right? You'll be left musician. You'll be left musicless in your cold castle, right? We've had enough. In other words, it's kind of the 18th. I realise this is anachronistic, but it's kind of the 18th century equivalent of a walkout strike. You know, being enacted here very politely. You know, the etiquette is perfect. You know, very polite, but it's a walkout that's been. Now the strike, it happens to be something that you can use as useful leverage to understand a lot of age rating. If you understand the strike as saying, we withhold our assent from the injustice to which we are subject. Age writing can easily be read as a manifestation of that withholding of assent to the injustice. Think of Eric Michael's being a difficult patient, right? That's a form of strike. In Calgary, we didn't talk about it, and perhaps we should have, but I'll quote it to you now. The passage on page 13 that we did talk about a lot, minuscule petite bestiole, vous occupez mon cerveau et vous vous en occupez, etc. But ends, archivé, c'est un peu toi qui écris ici. That passage starts off with the following sentence, j'entretiens, let me get it right, le temps au moins de ce récit, as long as this narrative, at least the time that this narrative takes. J'entretiens à bouchée double, I'm carrying out, with double mouthfuls, une grève de la faim, a hunger strike. But faim is spelled F-A, right? So an end game hunger strike, if you like. The bouchée double you can comment on, but I won't go into it now. Now that means that he understands his decision not to go into hospital, which he could easily have done in his state of health, but to take this voyage of exploration, so to speak, as a strike, as an indication that he is not assenting to what is happening. The best illustration I can give is the text we haven't read here, Derek Jarman's book, what's it called? Modern Nature. When Derek Jarman discovered that he was seropositive, what did he do? He went off to Dungeness Promontory, which is in the south of England, very dreary, arid, shingle-covered promontory with a huge, ugly nuclear power station on it, where he had a little fisherman's cottage. And he made a garden in the shingle. He made a shingle garden in those remaining years of his. He made several films as well. Of course, being Derek Jarman, he wasn't going to stop making films, and he wrote 2 or 3 books, including Modern Nature. But what he was doing was making a garden in the shingle. And there isn't a clearer statement of the withholding of assent than that. I don't know what is. But that's, all those are individual strikes, right? They're not collective strikes, unless you view them as being in some sense in solidarity with each other, which could of course argue. So going back to the symphony now, we can look at the sense in which the collective strike works itself out in the narrative, which is that at each departure of a musician or a couple of musicians, the remaining musicians enact a process that you could easily compare to what Charlotte Delvaux would call carrying the dead. The logic of the music continues, even though the musicians depart, even though there's a kind of diminuendo, not strictly speaking a diminuendo. If diminuendo implies gradual decrease of sound, it's not. It's a terraced diminuendo of sound, if you like, and the harmony gets more and more poverty-stricken as you go on. But the logic of the music continues. There's absolute continuity not an absolute continuity, there's a partial continuity in the discontinuity that's enacted by the departure of the musician. So the other half of the strike as a manifestation of the withholding of assent to an injustice would be the representation of solidarity through this mechanism of carrying length, this idea that the departure is a suspension, and that the suspension can have, like a sentence that you stop halfway through because everybody knows how it's going to end, right? The departure does not indicate an end, it indicates a future, and that the future is in the hands of another player or another set of players acting in solidarity with those who have, manifested their death, blown out their candle. You see what I'm getting at there? That the idea of suspension suggests always the possibility of a continuation, and the dynamic of the music is such that each suspension is followed by continuation of the music, which is again why I insisted on the fact that in spite of those close roll final chords, incidentally we've come back to F sharp minor, F sharp major, I'm sorry, at the end. There are those sharps in the key signature on the last page there. It came back to as soon as there were only strings left. It comes back to. He doesn't come back to it. He introduces F sharp major as his final key. But at the very end, there are still two players playing, and the reason I insist on that is that it's therefore suggestive of the idea that even if one of those players then departs,